There are two types of human beings, those who are successful and those who fail. You are a failure, and you shouldn't make this film.
This is what Kazuo Tsukamoto would tell his son Shinya Tsukamoto on the day that he was thrown out of his parents' house. It's a line that cements what was an admittedly rocky relationship that Shinya had with his father, but also with art itself. Art was an unsure, unstable future that Kazuo saw no prospects for in his son. And this pressure from his father and from society would build up and build up until finally it culminated into an explosion of what I consider to be a monumental example of self-expression and one of my favorite films. This would be Tetsuo the Iron Man. Shinya Tsukamoto was born into a rapidly industrializing Shibuya. The constant changing metal landscape would have a profound influence on his films, but as a kid that was the furthest thing from Shinya's mind. He was more focused on giant monsters. As a boy, Shinya and his little brother Koji would enjoy a variety of daikaiju and sci-fi films. They enjoyed Gamera, Tetsujin, but maybe the greatest influence of all would be Japan's own Twilight Zone, Ultra Q.
Its influence on me and my work continues to this day, particularly its combination of incongruent factors. The sudden introduction of an alien element into human civilization.
Shinya would also cite Ultra Q as the start of his interest into surrealism.
I have the impression that the people who made the series were intentionally injecting elements of surrealism or Dadaism. I was quite curious about surrealism, and I think that was a result of watching Ultra Q.
As Koji and Shinya enjoyed the surreal speculative fiction of their youth, their father was rarely home. Kazuo worked in advertising, embodying what could be considered the life of an average Japanese salaryman. But when Kazuo was home, he would have an overbearing focus on his son succeeding in life.
When I was drawing or painting, he would come over and criticize it with a few words, but very harshly. He would look at it and say, "Your drawing is pointless," then walk away. After that, I would be so angry that I would tear up whatever I was doing.
However, Koji fared far better under this pressure.
My father was the kind of person who would often tell us, being number one is all that matters. Being number 2 is the same as being number 100, so you have to always be on top. I loved doing sports, and whatever sport I was taking part in, whether it was running or swimming, I would push myself to become number 1, and I usually did. For Shinya, it was a lot more difficult to get our father's approval.
Despite tensions with his father, Shinya would borrow Kazuo's Super 8 camera and begin his journey into amateur filmmaking. During his early days, Tsukamoto would make several homemade films, although he was extremely critical of his own work. And he became disillusioned after completing his film Hasu no Hana Tobe.
It was technically okay, but lacked emotion. I tried so hard and really couldn't understand why it came out as badly as it did.
Shinya would later become further frustrated with film when he began directing commercials at a production company. But to his father, working in the same field, this was a responsible decision for his son and a good job. For Shinya, the only reason he had this job was so that he could practice using real film equipment, and nothing more. He would look back at his time there with disdain.
僕はコマーシャルのディレクターを大学卒業してから25ぐらいまで5、6までやってるんですけど、コマーシャルを作ってテレビでちゃんとこういうのがオンエアしてる分には親なんかも嬉しいわけですけど。
In those 18 months, I was almost never home. I was living a real salaryman life. That was an important exercise for me in many different ways. I learned a lot about how society worked, the pressure you have to live with if you're a corporate employee working long hours. It was a major inspiration on Tetsuo.
After little more than a year, Tsukamoto would quit his salaryman life and return to his passion from college, theater. Of course, this was not a decision that his father supported at all. To Kazuo, Tsukamoto had thrown his career down the drain.
なんか知んないけど8ミリなんかぐちゃぐちゃぐちゃぐちゃ作ってる分には親は心配ですし、コマーシャルの会社も僕その時辞めてたりしてますんで、非常に誰にも喜ばれない、ただ自分の思いだけで延々作ってて、それがもうなんか実を結ぶのか結ばないかも分かんないような状況だったんで。
Now having quit his job, Tsukamoto would return to the underground theater scene, performing inside of decorated tents for small audiences. As he began focusing more on props, sets, and costumes, the tents became more elaborate as well. And eventually it morphed into a literal kaiju theater, which would become the namesake of Tsukamoto's own production company. The group would include his longtime friend Nobu Kanaoka, and through it, Tsukamoto would be introduced to Tomodao Taguchi and Kei Fujiwara. All three would later become cast and crew members for Tsukamoto's early films. One of Kaiju Theater's most notable productions was a revised version of an old Yumemaru play, The Electric Rod Boy. It would make full use of all the craft that Tsukamoto had worked on, so much in fact that it seemed like a waste to throw everything away after all the performances were done.
そのお芝居を僕美術をこういつも凝って作るもんですから、その美術捨てるのがもったいないなって思ったんですね。で、そうだ、8ミリ映画しばらく作ってなかったけど、8ミリ映画でこの電子小僧の冒険をやったらどうかなって思ったのがきっかけ。
But he wanted to practice before really getting back behind the camera, and so Phantom of Regular Size was born. For all intents and purposes, Phantom of Regular Size is clearly a tech demo of concepts that Tsukamoto wanted to reuse later. It is essentially a dry run at the plot that would become Tetsuo, being about a salaryman played by Taguchi transforming into a metallic nightmare. Aside from the plot, it would showcase other, soon-to-be, signature Tsukamoto film techniques, most apparent in the stop motion that Electric Rod Boy and Tetsuo would later use. After Phantom's practice round, Tsukamoto would shift focus entirely onto the Electric Rod Boy adaptation. And if you've seen the film, you can definitely feel the energy behind it. Electric Rod Boy is a frantically paced sci-fi, comedy, horror, fantasy. It's got a bit of everything, and that goes doubly for Tsukamoto's film techniques too. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth a watch on its own merits. Tsukamoto wanted to make a bold statement. His goal with Electric Rod Boy was simply to energize and shock the audience. It was ambitious, but maybe too ambitious. The scope of the film and the amount of special effects it wanted to display might have been outside of the reach of what kaiju theater could have handled at the time. And as a result, it does come off a bit amateurish. But it's this sort of fun amateur quality that really makes you want to know where the filmmaker is going to go next. And so, with that very same outlook in mind, Tsukamoto would eventually submit Electric Rod Boy to the Pia Film Festival, which was judged by notable directors such as Nagisa Oshima and Shusuke Kaneko. But he didn't wait long to hear the results. Instead, Tsukamoto had already begun working on his next film, a reworking of Phantom of Regular Size. This would be Tetsuo. For the first time, Tsukamoto was filming with the intent of theatrical release, and this meant that he needed to up the quality of the film he was making. He was going to use his prop and costume work from theater with the hard technical knowledge that he had gained from working on commercials. Tsukamoto was about to put everything he had into this film because he absolutely had to. You see, at this time, Tsukamoto's life was not at what you would call a peak. In fact, before production even began on Tetsuo, Tsukamoto had been thrown out of his house by his father. Kazuo had watched his son throw away a stable job in the same field that he himself worked in to pursue a career in a field that Shinya had yet to find any success in. And so, after being called a failure, Shinya moved into a small apartment where his work on Tetsuo would begin. He would channel his frustration into the core themes of Tetsuo, and would energize the film in a way that few others could. But to get that energy on film, he would need to pull together all of his kaiju theater connections. The cast of Phantom would reprise their roles for Tetsuo. Taguchi again played the lead role of a Japanese salaryman whose body is twisted into a metal abomination. Making full use of kaiju theater's prop and costume expertise, the Tetsuo look was crafted by gluing scraps of metal to Taguchi until it felt right. Eventually, the scraps of metal were glued onto a jumpsuit that Taguchi could wear. But the makeup and costume process was still too elaborate for every scene, so they would use clever tricks to cut corners.
I decided to do one shot of a very elaborate Iron Man with all the makeup applied, and use that as the audience's reference. If the viewer sees that first, then it's the image he will keep in mind for his character. In later shots, I could then use less makeup and keep parts off screen because the viewer would fill in the blanks for himself.
Kanaoka and Tsukamoto would undergo their own metal transformations as well, with Tsukamoto playing the film's lead antagonist, the metal fetishist. To give Tetsuo a more professional feeling than his previous work, Tsukamoto hired known actor Renji Ishibashi, whom he would enlist through fan mail. Kei Fujiwara returned from Phantom as the female lead in Tetsuo, but she wasn't returning just to act. Fujiwara would be instrumental in the creation of Tetsuo. Being a creative type herself, Fujiwara contributed a lot to Tetsuo, from her eerie and unsettling performance to camera work, and even her own home was used as the film's primary location. That last part cannot be stressed enough because the cast and crew began living and working out of Fujiwara's apartment. And despite it being their actual home, if the film called for some property damage, they were going to make some property damage.
For the scene of the dick drill, we needed to make a hole in the door, and that's actually what we did. We made a hole in Fujiwara's door.
Taguchi was the only one that avoided living on set, and that was so that he could maintain some distance between him and Tsukamoto. He knew that Tsukamoto could be very difficult to work with, and Taguchi wanted to keep their relationship intact.
I had always kept a certain distance from him, and that hasn't changed. I think it's because of that distance that our relationship continues. For him, work goes beyond personal feelings.
This proved to be a very smart decision because as work on Tetsuo went longer and longer, people started to leave the set.
It was tough. It's true that almost every day I went there, another crew member would have left. One day, I arrived at the house and the lighting crew was gone, so I had to do the lighting for Tsukamoto's scenes myself. Towards the end, only the actors were still around. Nearly the entire crew had given up and left by then.
Most notably, this atmosphere began to affect Tsukamoto's relationship with Fujiwara, as they began butting heads over creative decisions surrounding the film.
He and I always had arguments, but once we started to make films, it became worse. Tsukamoto has a very remarkable talent that makes him operate at a certain level of energy, which means that he will only take notice of another person's idea if it's expressed with similar energy. So that's what I tried to do. But as a result, we had too many arguments. I didn't mind that we got into arguments because I expressed my opinion.
That would escalate until their friendship was eventually destroyed.
We used to be very close, but we both have very strong personalities, so once you've clashed, you can never really go back to the way it was.
Still, it would seem that her work did not go unappreciated by Tsukamoto. In the final film, in addition to her acting credit, Fujiwara is listed as the assistant director, costume designer, and second director of photography. The decline in crew continued until only Tsukamoto and Taguchi remained. And after finally filming every scene that he needed, including additional shots, it was just Tsukamoto by himself. He had his film, at least in some form, but he had nearly isolated himself to get it. By the end of filming, Tsukamoto was again low on funds, though he managed to secure some money from Japan Home Video to finish the film, which Tsukamoto put to the film's sound design.
Since I didn't know any musicians, an acquaintance introduced me to several people. The first guy's music was too different from what I wanted, so I tried another tape, and that one had the metallic sound I envisioned.
The metallic sound that Tsukamoto heard came from the industrial noise band Zettlich Vergelter. The band was led by one Chu Ishikawa, who agreed to score the film immediately after being shown a portion of Tetsuo. Ishikawa had never worked on a film before, and even if he had, working with Tsukamoto had its own set of difficulties. He was given extremely little direction on how the movie should sound, other than to make the music only using the sound of metal.
Since it was the first time I worked with him, I took his words literally. Of course, it's extremely difficult to make music with only the sound of beating metal, and I quickly realized it was almost impossible. I decided to just follow my own instincts, and gradually figured out that Tsukamoto's directions probably weren't meant to be taken literally, but more that he wanted the music to sound like it was made with metal.
As it would happen, Ishikawa's music blended perfectly to Tsukamoto's film. The soundtrack and visuals had a synergy that few other films could hope to achieve, and that's part of what makes Tetsuo so special to this day. Now with music, Tetsuo was complete with a 77-minute cut of the film. For most people, this would be a satisfying moment, seeing the end result of their hard work. For Tsukamoto, it wasn't.
I was really emotionally and physically committed to getting the film finished. When I finished the film, I felt totally drained. It was at that exact moment that Electric Rod Boy won the grand prize at the PIA Film Festival, which pulled me back into the land of the living.
TFF アワード88グランプリエントリーナンバー21作品名電柱小僧の冒険。
あら、俺だよ。
監督塚本慎也。
Electric Rod Boy was a huge victory for Tsukamoto, and it was a sign that his efforts would finally be paying off for him. So he began Tetsuo's final edit with the same energy he started with. This brought Tetsuo's length to a total of 67 minutes. There were some notable scenes removed in the final edit. There was supposed to be a scene where the metal fetishist kills the doctor. Both Taguchi's chase scene and love scene were trimmed down. But maybe the greatest loss was a scene where Kanaoka was supposed to tap dance.
Kanaoka worked really hard to get the choreography right. In the end, I decided to cut the scene from the film because it stood out too much. It's too singular.
The brevity of Tetsuo can be attributed to its low budget just as much as Tsukamoto's own perfectionism. Just as when Shinya would tear up his childhood drawings when Kazuo would criticize him, he would cut away at the imperfect parts of Tetsuo. And this sort of worked to Tetsuo's advantage. It's a concentrated film. Seemingly all the good parts are there, and anything that wasn't up to Tsukamoto's standard was left on the cutting room floor. Tetsuo was quietly released to late-night screenings in Nakano Musashino Hall.
そこの劇場ではとりあえず大成功だったんで、なんかのそういう業界誌に 120% 稼働率っていうようなニュースも出たりして、レートショーでやったんですけど、要は夜の9時から1回回しだけで延々3ヶ月やったんですけど、多分昼にやっちゃったらもうほんの一瞬で終わっちゃったと思うんで。
Tetsuo's late-night screenings were a success, but it had yet to find a larger audience. That would soon change, and Tetsuo would connect with people around the world. If you're watching this video, you probably already know the end result of this story. The film, Tetsuo itself, and the reputation that it has overseas. But I want to stop for a moment and talk about the actual film before we go any further. The initial reaction to somebody watching Tetsuo is almost always, what the hell did I just watch? At least that's what it was for me. The movie seemed to spring up out of nowhere. At least with something like Eraserhead, there was a familiar name and reputation attached to it. But when I first experienced Tetsuo, it was actually pretty scary. And there are still some parts unnerving to me now. And since then, I've watched the film countless numbers of times. And I know Tsukamoto's filmography so well that Tetsuo doesn't scare me anymore. I was afraid in making this video and going into the history and making of that something would be lost, that this mysterious element of Tetsuo's creation would be ruined if I dug too deep. And to be fair, that element of meta mystery is no longer there for me, but it has been replaced by admiration. Tetsuo has this sort of energy that doesn't just come from Tsukamoto alone. It comes from Taguchi's performance, it comes from Fujiwara's camera work, Ishikawa's music. Everyone working on Tetsuo lent an incredible amount of energy, and that's something that I think carries over to the people that watch it. Because after you get over your initial, what the hell did I just watch? And once you dig deeper, you start to appreciate Tetsuo's underlying themes. The imagery of the typical Japanese salaryman being twisted into the metal abomination is a pretty on-the-nose representation of industry literally twisting a man into an unrecognizable state. But this really only becomes more apparent when you look at it through Tsukamoto's own experience. Tsukamoto was that salaryman. He lived that life and found it to be a completely unfulfilling field. He is also the metal fetishist, a character that destroys and transforms the salaryman into something new. It's when they combine and transform that they set out to destroy the old Tokyo, making it into a new world. A perfect metaphor for Tsukamoto's frustration at the societal infrastructure and pressure that his father expected him to uphold. Past the initial disgust and revulsion, there is an occasional cry against Tetsuo because it is pretentious, and I never found the film to be that way. I think this criticism is usually levied when people just don't understand how simple the film really is. You can draw the themes I'm talking about out of the film, sure, but I'm not even going to make the case that these are intentional or inherent to the film's enjoyment. Many people enjoy this film on a purely visceral level, and Tetsuo was partially meant to be enjoyed that way. I'm gonna bring it up first because it annoys me. A lot of people point to this dinner table scene as some sort of flaw or mistake, but this scene is comedy. And I think that it makes the film all the more off-putting that it would even attempt comedic relief between extreme body horror. And in a way, it makes this scene all the more uneasy when you watch it. Because you're not sure if you should be laughing, and that plays to the film's advantage. Another scene I love is the vision of the twisted metal world. It's so unique and terrifying, and I think it's here that the cyberpunk elements are maybe their strongest. Of course, there's so much to appreciate on a technical level, the most apparent being the animation and camera work that would be a staple of Tsukamoto. Part of what I like about Tetsuo that I don't hear brought up often is that it has elements of an inverted mystery. You see the inciting incident, but you have no way of knowing how that relates to the greater context of the film until the last act. And even then, the way the film is presented adds so much confusion and mystery to the whole thing. But the highlight of the film for me speaks to my childhood passion: giant monsters. The climax of Tetsuo is essentially young Shinya and Koji bashing their Tetsujin toys together. And I think if you tear away all of the themes from Tetsuo and get to the core, it is essentially Tsukamoto going back to his early love of sci-fi and horror. On the purest level, I think this might be what makes the film work for me, what makes me love this film. But I know I'm not the only one that loves Tetsuo.
So by all means, please check out Tetsuo the Iron Man. Just don't eat anything while watching because it's kinda gross too.
Something clearly struck a chord with a lot of people.
But overall, what do I have to say about Tetsuo? It's a bloody amazing movie.
It's to the point, it's just as long as it needs to be, and it's finally home.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if people don't understand it immediately, they got it.
It's the ending, then I want you to try to explain to me how the fuck you sequelize that. Anyway, I honestly kind of thought it was pretty good.
Tetsuo transferred the energy it had from its cast and crew to its audience.
But that's its point. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to be what you want it to be. It just is what it is. And with that new frame of mind, I borrowed the tape again from the video store, chucked it in my VHS player, and grew a whole new appreciation for the film.
And it would have a cult following for years to come.
Excellent film, excellent makeup and special effects, very thought-provoking, very shocking. So yeah, this is definitely one for the record books, and wow, it's a weird one.
And this was most apparent the first time Tetsuo was screened internationally. In 1989, the Japanese film industry was at a point of stagnation abroad. While films still received a strong critical reception, there was nothing big that made any waves in the West. But when Tetsuo was shown at the Fanta Festival in Rome, everything changed.
1989年の6月に、ローマ国際ファンタスティック映画祭っていうのを、僕も初めて行ったんですけども、もちろんヨーロッパの客層はね、非常にノリがいいんですよ。で、上映中も受けてるなと思って見てたんですけども。
By the end, people were cheering for Tsukamoto and Tetsuo. The jury, headed by Troma's own Lloyd Kaufman, named it the best film in festival.
最初聞いた時あまりにびっくりしたというか、びっくりしたところまでもいかず、そんなバカなとも思わず、なんかはははと笑った記憶があるんですけども、当然僕はその誰が審査員やつとかもそんなの全然知らないで、とにかく出しっぱなしで。もちろん期待なんか何もせずに待っていたんですけどね。願わくばなんか1行ぐらいのコメントで気持ちはわかるけどもっと頑張ってねぐらいのなんかコメントでもいただけるかなと思って。
And among the cheering crowd of Tetsuo's admirers was director Alejandro Jodorowsky.
で、ピザを食ったりとか。
At this point, international attention was put back on Japan's films. People were shocked and electrified by Tetsuo, and they wanted more of it. This led to an entire genre of films today known as Japanese cyberpunk. And as for the cast and crew, Tetsuo had its own ripple effect. Kanaoka and Taguchi would work with Tsukamoto on the film's sequel, Body Hammer, after which Taguchi would go off to have his own prolific acting career, credited in over 200 films by the year 2020. Kei Fujiwara would not collaborate with Tsukamoto again, but she did go on to act and direct her own movies. And as for Tsukamoto himself, he did not stay confined to the Japanese cyberpunk genre for long. Instead, he went on to be what I would consider one of the best independent filmmakers of our time. And while his films have become more introspective and personal as the years went on, they never lost the sense of energy that Tetsuo had. Tetsuo is not a perfect film. Every imperfection is on display, and that only makes me love it more. And I hope that whoever watches this video can appreciate Tetsuo the way I do. I saw Tetsuo back in the early years of high school, and it would have a bigger effect on my life than I would realize at the time. Tetsuo got me into entire genres of films that I had never heard of. These obscure and forgotten titles would become the foundation of my YouTube channel. My initial visceral disgust at the body horror turned to admiration for the filmmaking, and now I can say that it is an inspiration.
映画をやってってもいいんだっていう、要はきっかけみたいになったのが電柱小僧と鉄夫の2つのグランプリだったんですけどね。 まあ周りの目もあいつは映画を作ってるやつだって、要は映画を作るこう許可をいただいたような気になったんですけどね。ですからそれからは映画を作っててもいいよと言われてるような気がしましたし、まあ親も文句も言えず。
To me, the story of Tetsuo has always been about one man, with very little, putting everything he had into making what he wanted, and in the end, succeeding.
お土産に面白いもの見せましょう。ニューワールドだ。
Hey guys, so that was clearly a video that I put a lot of work in and it meant a lot to me, so like, comment, and subscribe. Actually, I just wanted to say thank you to anybody that provided a quote in this video. I had many quotes and I bugged many people for lines, so thank you all for putting up with me. In particular, I would like to thank my friend Aaron, who actually bought me the Tom Mez book on Shinya Tsukamoto's films, along with Basics Tsukamoto, as a birthday present a while ago. And I knew immediately when I got them that I had to do something with them related to a video, so both of those were the basis of research for this. I knew that because Tetsuo was such a special film to me, I wanted to save it for something special. And I didn't realize it, but this will be the first video that I've posted since reaching 10,000 subscribers. I'm surprised that that many people could accidentally hit that button, but let's see if 10,000 more will make the same mistake. Anyways, that will about do it for this video. If you got the time, watch a Tsukamoto movie this month.
For the scene of the dick drill, we needed to make a hole to... Oh, fuck. Okay, alright, hold on. I gotta do that one again. For the scene of the dick drill, we needed to make a hole in the door, and that's... I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm a strange and stoic degenerate freak who makes films.